I did international viola competitions, and it was actually great preparation for me to take orchestra auditions on a high level, like top orchestral auditions. I always was in the finals. I took many auditions and made the finals and didn't get the job. Several, I got runner-up, associate principal in San Francisco, principal in Minnesota. I was always a bridesmaid, never a bride. And I had a lot of self-doubt, like, what am I doing wrong? And I actually flipped it on its head. What am I doing right? Because I'm doing a lot of things right. There's just that 1% I need to look at and improve and polish and refine and get me just over the top and win a position.
Hey everybody, this is Chris from honestypill.com. You are listening to episode 28 of the Honesty Pill podcast. This season on the show, I'll be talking to people who are breaking the status quo, ditching outdated traditions, and building a better future for themselves and the people they work with. I'll be connecting you with musicians, sound healers, coaches, hip-hop artists, actors, viola experts, and people who not only inspire and educate every single day, but who are experts at talking about what they do so you can get inspired in your own work. My guest today is Los Angeles Philharmonic violist Mick Wetzel, who in addition to being a world-class musician, is also the founder of the Viola Pro, coaching for musicians on auditions, competitions, and really tactical ideas on how to practice. We're going to talk about his own audition journey, how he learned to deal with performance anxiety and pressure, and exactly what Mick does in his own practice room to get ready to walk on stage at the Walt Disney Concert Hall week after week. Mick is also going to talk a little bit about whether or not talent has anything to do with being successful. What a great topic. Mick gets super geeky about specific tempos and dynamics for audition excerpts that you will definitely be asked to play, so get ready to take some notes, viola players. And it's worth noting, being a brass player and aiming my trumpet bell directly at the back of Mick's head in the LA Phil for the past decade and a half, the fact that we are still friends speaks to Mick's incredibly professional and friendly demeanor. And he's a pretty big dude too, so I'm really grateful that we get along. You're going to want to listen all the way to the end of this one because the Viola Pro has some brand new programs coming up that you are going to want to know about. Okay, let's have a listen. I never dreamed that when I started this podcast back in September 2020, 6 months into the pandemic, that we'd still be talking about canceled concerts and masks, but here we are. And since we're here, I have to give a shout out to my guest today for creating this. And I'm holding up in my hands an official theviolapro.com COVID-19 mask. And I have to say, it is a beautiful piece of equipment. Well done. And welcome to the podcast, Mick Wetzel.
Thank you. Thank you so much. It's great to be here, Chris.
So let's settle something right here at the top of the show. Your given legal name is not Mick, is it?
No, it's Minor. And it goes back 500 years. It's like that Boy Named Sue song from Johnny Cash.
It's a totally musical name too, right? Minor. Did you come from a musical family?
Nothing to do with music. My family's from Alsace-Lorraine, the area between France and Germany. And so it's a French name. And my last name is Wetzel, last name German. And I got the dubious honor of having the name in this generation.
So that's interesting that you didn't come from a musical family, yet here you are, a musician in the Los Angeles Philharmonic with the name Minor. And that's a pretty rare thing because most of the people that we work with, and that certainly have had guests on this show, had a lot of music going on. So no music in the house at all, or?
No, so I misspoke. The name doesn't come from music, but I do come from a musical family. My dad, even though he's a businessman, was a professional athlete. Played professional baseball. My mom is an opera singer. She's 92 and she still sings. And so I grew up listening to Maria Callas and tons of vocal things going on in my house.
Okay, that makes a lot more sense. So was it expected that you would learn an instrument?
Yes.
And was it viola from day one?
No. We had pianists, singers, trombone player, and no violinists. And my mom asked me one morning, I was 7 years old, hey, would you like to study violin? I was like, yeah, sure. And that's where it started.
Wow, that's incredible. And you're not the only musical hotshot in your family, are you? You're married to Stacy Wetzel, who is a violinist with the LA Phil, and your sister-in-law is Cynthia Phelps, New York Philharmonic's principal viola. Is that right?
That's right. Yeah, absolutely.
So has there been any like chamber music breakouts over Thanksgiving or?
Yeah, we do that, but we try and not talk shop during holidays, and usually you try and get away from frying hamburgers when you do that for a living.
Probably a good way to avoid unruly conversations or complaining about conductors.
True.
Let's talk a little bit about your job at the LA Phil. Which would best describe playing on stage at the Walt Disney Concert Hall? High pressure or insanely high pressure?
Gosh, Chris, neither. Yeah, I mean, I love what I do so much that, like we just did Prokofiev's Fifth Symphony, and it's not I would put it kind of in the medium range of difficulty violistically, just in terms of technique. You know what I liken it to mostly is that movie Finding Nemo, and you have that school of fish where they like all point together where Nemo's supposed to go. That's what I feel like I do. I follow for a living as a group. We're like a school of fish. But no, I mean, everybody that I play with, there are such great players in the viola section. I have to maintain my technique. I have to stay in good viola fitness. But if I'm doing that, I wouldn't say there's a whole lot of pressure on a day-to-day basis, and mostly just like love it. Is that weird? I don't know.
No, I think you're lucky. I guess I could answer the question myself too. I don't really feel nervous when I'm working, but there is a lot of pressure. People are counting on you.
I get the difference. Yeah.
Yeah. So, and I know that probably earlier on in your career, I would assume there was a little bit more stress involved. So let's talk a bit about performance under pressure. And, here's kind of a two-part question. How do you handle the demands that come with an orchestra job like you have? And what advice would you give students who want to sit where you're sitting?
Okay, yeah. So full disclosure, the first 2 years of my career with the LA Philharmonic, which was 28 years ago, was my tenure review process. Probation, and that was a lot of pressure. And back during that time, there was more of a trend of hiring people, and they go through the tenure process and they wouldn't get tenure. That just seemed to happen a lot back then. And I had pulled myself up to get to win this audition. There was no way in heck I was going to let that opportunity go. So my antidote to any fear that I had or pressure that I felt was to just practice my booty off. And I would say for those first 2 years, I don't want to overstate here, but I think I can say this. I could pretty much play things from memory, whether it was a Mahler symphony. We did Wagner with S2E28 back then, a lot of Sibelius. I was so prepared, and I would come home from the first concert of the week, Thursday night, and practice for an hour after the concert. Like I'd highlight things that I wasn't happy with. And by golly, the next night, Friday night, I would kick booty on that. I would nail it. And, you go around in that circle enough. Like I remember we went on tour with S2E28 with all of the Sibelius symphonies. You do that once. The next time you play the Sibelius symphonies, whichever one it is, it's like a piece of cake. As long as I'm in good violistic shape, I know the notes. And often I'm playing off the same part that I did like 5 years previously, just the luck of the draw. That's happened to me so many times.
By the way, that tour you're mentioning, the Sibelius Unbound, was 2007.
Wow.
That was my first tour with the LA Phil.
Oh, very cool.
And I remember coming in and thinking, whoa, is this how we roll here? Like we just do all the symphonies of this composer and that? And the answer is, yep.
No, and I remember there was one passage, and I can't remember which symphony it is. I'm embarrassed that I don't know this. That was really challenging for the violas, not just technically, but to play it together. And S2E28 scheduled a sectional for the violas. And how often does that happen? Like never. I'd never experienced that before. And we were all kind of freaked out. Like, what's he going to do? Is he going to fry us? And so we were super prepared. We played it. This is the structure of the sectional. We all sat down, hearts racing. And he said, okay, let's play. We played it. And he goes, very good. And that was it. We were done.
So for listeners who are not in an orchestra, don't understand maybe that having a sectional with the music director on tour is generally not a good sign. That means something is going really wrong. So
and I wasn't clear. This was actually when we did it back at Disney Hall before we left for tour. I think S2E28 had maybe had a previously bad experience with another orchestra. I don't know who. And he was concerned. And that concern led him to set up this sectional. And we as a group, we knocked it out of the park. on one take, just like we played it. It was lined up. It was clean. It sounded really good, at least from my ears. And he sat back and was like, very good. Thank you. And boom, we're gone. So
it sounds like you're saying there's a time and a place for this level of intensity and work in your career too, because certainly you can't sustain that level of intensity for a multi-decade career, right?
Right. It's true. And I like I mentioned, the antidote for me has always been preparation, staying in good shape, good fitness level with my technique, my viola technique. But also, even today, Chris, I have the parts on my music stand over here for 2 weeks hence. I don't know if this is a direction you were planning on going with this podcast, but I'm 60 years old. I have found that it takes more time, more strategy, and more care to stay in shape violistically, but also I need to prepare better and a little bit differently for the first rehearsal next week.
How so? How has your preparation changed?
Yeah, I don't see as well as I used to.
Mick is holding up his reading glasses.
And so we did, like I mentioned, Prokofiev Fifth Symphony last week, and these are Michael Tilson Thomas's personal parts, incredibly hard to read. And there's one, I wish I could show you all. There's one passage where there were several A naturals in one measure, and they were all a different level. They look like, and I'm like, well, do I play the one that's low a little bit lower and the one that's high a little bit higher? I mean, that starts to mess with you. You have to have a little bit of self-doubt in the moment, in a performance. But I have to like mark things more than I used to. I have gotten recently an upgrade in my prescription for my glasses. And part of that's the pandemic, honestly, because we didn't play for a long time. And at the Hollywood Bowl, we play a lot more familiar repertoire usually. And I don't want to say I still can play, Mahler 4 from memory, but kind of, and we've been playing a lot of unfamiliar repertoire lately. And I have to really prepare more, familiarize myself, map out fingerings, map out bow distribution. And even if there is a natural and a sharp that I'm not sure if it's a natural or sharp, I actually have to mark it.
I'm going to commiserate with you for a second. Last week, I walked in with my Berg part into the library, and I said, I don't need reading glasses, but I can't see this. Would you mind blowing this up for me? And as the librarian, Steve Biagini, was enlarging the part by like 15%, he said, no, you definitely don't need reading glasses, as he smirked and handed it back to me. So I think I'm right behind you, man.
We have the best librarians in the world. These guys are amazing.
We literally do. They're amazing. So you mentioned a sports background and you had opera going on. You currently live in a city with almost 4 million people. How does that compare from where you grew up?
Couldn't be more different. I grew up in Eastern Washington in a very small farming community. And most people, just think to yourself for a moment, what does small mean? How many people is that? People say, oh, is that 10,000? Is that 5,000? No, it was 350 people. And I literally knew every person in that town and they knew me. There was no opportunity to get into trouble without my parents hearing about it. So it was good in a lot of ways. So
we talk about jobs that people had early on in life before they became musicians or even knew they were going to pursue music as a career. Can you tell that story? You had a really odd job involving snakes.
Oh, no.
I just want to get this on the record.
I can't believe you're asking me this question. Yeah, so I did a lot of non-music jobs to put myself through school. I went to, just a little bit of background, if that's okay, Chris. I went to Tanglewood when I was 16 years old, and I did have a scholarship to attend Tanglewood, but I needed to buy my own plane ticket, and that was expensive. And so I worked on a hay farm for 8 weeks prior to going out there. And there's nothing worse for your hands as a string player than bucking 85, 90-pound bales. But I was super buff by the end of that summer. But when I got to Tanglewood, people would say, so where were you before Tanglewood? And I would say, well, I was bucking bales. And they would laugh. And I never could figure out why they were laughing until I realized I overheard someone else say, where were you before you came here? Oh, I was at Aspen. I'm like, oh, now I get it. So I never divulged that again. But even more countrified, I guess, was my dad set me up with a business, and he bought me a a hoe handle, brand new hoe handle, took electrical staples and ran a wire down through that, looped it at the end. And where I grew up, there are a lot of rattlesnakes, and they're pests, and I don't think I could kill a snake today, but back then they're territorial. And if you take them and put them somewhere else, they just come back, and they come out at night to stay warm on the highway. And so my friend and I would go down and we'd loop that wire around that poor snake's head and pop the head off and put him in a jar. And my dad had a friend that he worked with that had a hat band business, a rattlesnake hat band business, and he would give me $10 per snake. And when you're 10 years old, I was 10 at the time, 5 snakes, that's $50 back then. That was some good dough. So yeah, a little different than most people.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry I brought it up. It's one of the most bizarre jobs of anyone I've ever heard. And it also, it's like there's got to be a Viola joke about, rattlehead snakes in a jar. I don't know. We'll have to work on that later. But no, the point of it is we do what we have to do. I was slinging bagels and newspapers in a deli near a train station. You were cutting the heads off rattlesnakes. Some people were in Aspen.
Yep.
Speaking of your lifelong trajectory, you got a doctorate in 2010, right? So let's do some math. You joined the LA Phil in 1995, right?
94.
94. Yeah. So let's see, 2010 minus carry the 1. Yeah, that's like 15, 16 years after you achieved one of the most coveted positions in the industry, you decided to go back to school. Most people would not do that. Most people would be satisfied with the job. What made you go back to school at that point in your life and career?
Thank you. That's a great question. And I honestly can't really answer it very well. It's something I always intended on doing. My wife, Stacy, and I always have had a passion for teaching. And that's how our careers started out. I was an assistant professor at the University of Michigan. I had that job. I hadn't functioned in that job yet. Stacy had also been hired at the University of Michigan. We'd just both gotten our masters from that school. And our intention was to teach at the University of Michigan. And there was an opening in the San Francisco Symphony for violin. And I told Stacy, I said, hey, this is kind of a research project. Would you consider going out there and taking that audition? Because we have students who are going to be preparing for auditions and I don't know the first thing about it. And so she said, yeah, that's a great idea. Let's do that. So I made copies of all the excerpts from the list, and I made cassette tapes of the excerpts from LPs. I made her a playlist on a cassette tape, and man, she just went after it, and she won. And that it wasn't that I didn't expect her to win, but we were both kind of surprised. And she called me from San Francisco and she said, hey, do you want to move back to the West Coast? My wife's from California. I'm from Washington State. The Midwest is the Midwest. No ocean, no mountains. And so we came out West, and so back to answer your question, my intention was to be an academic. I wanted to have a university teaching position. I knew that as a section player, even though I'm in a major orchestra, I could never have a teaching position at a major university unless I had my doctorate. So that was kind of the reasoning at the time. I went back to school at USC to get my doctorate. It went well, but our youngest son was born and it was too much, so I backed out. And then when he was in junior high, we sort of revisited the idea. And the way it happened, and I'll try and give you a thumbnail sketch. There's a violist that I have known for a while, Paul Coletti. He called me. He and my wife have been friends since they were teenagers. He called me and he said, what is the tempo of the second movement of Beethoven's Fifth Symphony? I'm like, you're kidding, right? I mean, this is a joke. And he's like, no, I really want to know. So I sang it for him. And then he called me a week later. He said, would you consider teaching the orchestra rep class at UCLA? I'm like, yes, I would love to do that. And I did that for a few months. But what I did was in exchange for lessons from Paul Coletti, I taught the orchestra rep class, and I felt like I was getting the better end of the deal. And then at some point he said, why don't we just make this official? Why don't you just study with me? I'll get you a full scholarship. You can get your doctorate here. It'll give you 5 full years of lessons with me. And it just seemed like a no-brainer. It was difficult, Chris, to go back to school at age 45 because I had to kind of boot my brain. Things had changed a lot since I'd been in school, 20 years previously, but I did it. I kind of ramped it up. Yeah, I made it to the finish line.
As an LA film musician going back to school, there was probably a little bit of street cred built into that when you entered that arena. But on the other hand, you're very removed from the cultural vibe of the other students around you, probably. How did that feel to be fish out of water?
That's a great question too. So in a positive way, I did have some street cred as a member of the LA Phil on campus. One of my favorite professors, his name's Robert Winter. He actually is probably one of the smartest people that I've ever known. Incredibly high IQ, and he can sit down and play at the piano any opera. He can just play through any opera just from memory, that kind of brain. But he became a great mentor and advocate. And whenever I'd walk across campus with him, like we'd walk over to the student union to have lunch or whatever, he would say, "Hello, this is Mick Wetzel. He's a member of the LA Phil." It was part of my name, which I hate.
Yeah.
It's like the last thing I wanted. But on the other hand, with my fellow students, I don't think it was a whole lot of street cred, because I gave a presentation one time in class on tempos, different tempos, and how they've evolved over the years. And trying to think of the piece, La Mer. It was La Mer. And so I actually took 5 different recordings of the LA Phil from 1950 up until today, up until that time in 2010, and compared the tempos of La Mer. There were some variables that were not easily compared. Like there were some variables like the different music directors in any one year have this different tempos, right? But there was like a trend, and I noticed things were getting faster as we got closer to present day. Back in the 50s, La Mer was very slow. Anyway, I don't know why that was, but one of my friends in the back of the room when I was giving this presentation said, Professor Winter, it was Robert Winter who was teaching that class. He goes, "I have a question. I just wanted to ask if Mick Wetzel played on that recording back in 1950.
Thanks a lot, kid.
Yeah. And I'm like, you and me, buddy, outside. Let's go.
We're going to talk about auditions a little bit, but can I circle back to something you said a minute ago about creating those cassette tapes based on LPs that you had recorded? I do a similar thing, and I did a similar thing when I was preparing for auditions, creating these reference recordings. And the question that comes up, a lot of times people ask the question, what's your tempo for the Ravel Piano Concerto? I have no idea. The students have no clue what their tempo is. And the reason that is either they're still working on the notes or the technique, but they haven't immersed themselves in studying the pieces. So the question is, how do you pick a tempo, especially if the same orchestra can have 5, 6 different tempos over 50 years? What do you choose when you're going to walk in and prepare for an audition?
Yeah, it's a timely question. There was a question asked, that same question was asked about 2 specific excerpts on the American Viola Facebook page. And I just kind of was looking at it, and I was seeing all kinds of different answers, and I wasn't unhappy with the answers, but I was thinking, there's a more thorough answer that I would like to give. And so I try to identify my criteria for me, but also for the people that I coach for choosing a tempo. Part of it is research. You research the recordings and you try and get as close as possible to the music director that you're auditioning for, the orchestra that you're auditioning for, and you get as close to current time as possible. Then there's the practicality aspect. For example, at the LA Phil, I hate it when people say that, but at the LA Phil, we play Don Juan so fast and so loud, it's almost unplayable in a concert. But you would never play it that way in an audition. And so you have to be careful not play it too slowly. But, like 88 is super fast. I would lean more towards 80. And it's within parameters, it's not too slow, but it's playable. And it's not just being able to play it well, but another thing that I'm really fascinated by, and I'm planning on doing a workshop on this, or even just a YouTube video about acoustics. Like, for example, if I had like the most killer chops on planet Earth and I could just play Don Juan at 90 or 94, I would never play it that fast in Davies Symphony Hall, because Davies Symphony Hall in San Francisco is a bit muddy, and spitting out those notes here doesn't translate to 100 feet away where the committee is. However, I could do that in Disney Hall because Disney Hall is digital. Some people even describe Disney Hall as brittle. I would describe it as honest. You play really well, you sound great. If you don't play really well, finish the sentence. So that's how I choose the tempo. There's a practicality aspect, there's a research aspect, like, trying to get as close to the music director and the orchestra, but then acoustics. What can the hall handle? On the other end of the spectrum, if you don't mind if I go into this for a second, is Mendelssohn Scherzo on every audition list, just like Don Juan. We play in the LA Phil, Mendelssohn Scherzo so slowly and so softly, it's almost unplayable. I would never do that in an audition. So Mendelssohn Scherzo, a good kind of medium range tempo for Mendelssohn Scherzo is about 82, maybe 84. I would lean more towards 84 than 80, just because there's more control when you play it that way. Law of diminishing returns, though, if you go faster than 84, then everybody's like, no.
We don't want to show the committee how fast we can't play it.
That should be emblazoned on a bumper sticker somewhere. Yes.
But I've found there's a kind of a card trick that happens with tempo and clarity, which is, I'll go back to my examples, the Ravel Piano Concerto. I hear trumpet players playing it way faster than they're capable of. And what happens then is the pulse gets distorted. And then committees write down poor time. The player has no time. Whereas if you actually click it back 5, 6, 10 clicks, but play with a very consistent pulse, it sounds faster because there's so much clarity. And I have gotten away with murder playing excerpts like 10 clicks under tempo, but with precision, and never had anybody say anything about it. Like, oh, that was too slow. They great time, great pulse. So there's some card tricks that have to go on. I never thought of it in terms of acoustics, though. I love that angle.
Can I share a trade secret with your audience? And if I do this, we'll have to kill them all.
Everyone signs a waiver. And I only have 2 listeners anyway, so don't worry about it.
So if you play it at a conservative tempo, Ravel or Strauss or what have you, whether it's held in Laban or Don Juan, if you play at a conservative tempo and you nail it, it opens up the door of an opportunity for them to say, could you play it a little bit faster, please? And if there's a little bit of, frayed edges, they know already that you can play it perfectly, beautifully. And you know that. So it's actually a pretty good strategy if you think about it.
Same goes for dynamics, brass players. Vince Penzarella, my teacher in New York, used to say, don't play, the opening of Schumann 2 so softly that you crack every other note, because newsflash, it's always going to be too loud in an audition because there's no strings to play off of anyway. So play it comfortably, mezzo piano, don't blow the walls down. And if it's great and they want to hear it softer, you've just had a very nice dress rehearsal.
Perfect. Exactly. So you've had your private dress rehearsal, and you waded into something else too about dynamics. So I actually played Don Juan, just drop every dynamic by a half a dynamic in Don Juan so that I can be more expressive in my dynamics, because if I play as loud as I play with the LA Philharmonic viola section, it's all loud. It's like there's no mezzo forte, or I think what's the lowest dynamic in Don Juan? I think there is even a piano somewhere. And then Mendelssohn Scherzo is piano to mezzo piano. I think the loudest dynamic is mezzo piano. If I play pianissimo in the very beginning, I have nowhere to go. So it's not about necessarily the dynamic level for me as the dynamic range.
So I was going to get into auditions, but we're there already. So let me ask you this question. Do you play an excerpt the same way in an audition as you do on stage? I mean, you kind of answered that already, but can you really get specific? Are there certain things you do in an audition that you would never do on stage?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, there are things. And I'll just start with mindset. When I play Mother Goose Suite, The Magic Garden, the Jardin Féerique, I play it as if I'm leading 11 other violists. I know it's a viola solo, but I have to play it as, like, physically, I lead. And the reason why I do that is I feel like I need to have the committee rhythmically with me from the very beginning of the very first note. I lead, even though it's a solo, I physically lead so that the committee is with me. And I know a lot of auditions are behind screens. They may not see me leading, but I play differently when I lead. I can't really, it's one of those ethereal things. And then I had another thought too. When I play with the viola section, my goal is to blend. And I don't just blend my sound and the color or the dynamic, but also rhythmically, pitch wise. Like, we all have to make adjustments to what's going on around us pitch wise. And you can't do that when you're standing on stage taking an audition. This is one of the biggest challenges for me and people that I coach is how do you get your brain into that space playing, oh gosh, I don't know. Let's say Berlioz's Roman Carnival Overture. That's such a beautiful melodic section solo, and it's like a flock of bees. It's like you all are buzzing at the same time in the same place, and you're moving together, and it's like you feel it almost. How do you get that when you're standing alone on stage? It just is so unnatural. That's not what Berlioz designed that solo for, to stand on stage by yourself and play it. And the antidote I have for that is I just play it a lot with the recording. And I get those sounds in my ear, even what's going on around me, like the handing it off to the English horn and handing it off to the flute and those kinds of things. And I'll tell you, the thing that blows me away is when I've served on audition committees and I talk to people, but I also watch my colleagues, our colleagues, Chris, yours and our colleagues. I know they're hearing what they play in their ear while they're hearing the viola part. The only way I can duplicate that is with my experience, of course, but also playing it with the recording. And I have a specific thing that I do, and it's probably strange, but I have all the people I coach do it. And it works famously to put a rubber practice mute on your bridge, not a metal one. If you use a nickel one, you sound like a mosquito. A rubber one, you still hear your pitch and you can have some control and hear your control over and hear your dynamic range, but a rubber practice mute, and then not headphones, to actually have pretty good speakers around you to play in the texture of the sound.
Love it. Great strategy. And you reminded me of something when you mentioned the screens. And this is another trick that I'll share that you might relate to, is when a committee can see you. You talked about enrolling them in your tempo. I find that, and I don't make a big visual production out of this, but I will breathe audibly and so that I can be visually seen breathing. And it provides an ictus for the committee. Like, for example, the game of pairs in the Bartók concerto. I will breathe dum, bop, da, 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 dee, da, dum, and they are with me from the first note because of that breath. Brilliant. It's a card trick, but your job in an audition is to enroll the committee and make them feel secure, especially the music director. Is this safe? Is this player safe and reliable? Mm-hmm. And these aren't games that we play, but awareness of the fact that music is a language is important in this case.
Yeah, I love the word enroll, and it's such a great word. I want to just offer a word of caution though, because what you just described is sort of in the range of subliminal. They might not even be consciously aware of what you just did when you go bum, 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 bum. But you can wade a little bit into overbearing and obnoxious if it's too big of emotion. So, I mean, I just want to make sure that we're clear that I don't do that. I think that would be a negative thing. I think just a breath, spoiler alert, we actually use breath when we play too. So we're just frustrated trumpet players in the viola section. So
there's a viola joke in there somewhere. No, definitely. This is all about the subtlety and nuance.
Yes.
Nuance of communication, for sure.
Amen. Yep.
How many auditions have you taken? Or do you even remember? Because I stopped counting after a while.
Yeah, it's 30 plus. I mean, if you count the ones that I started taking in college, 30 plus.
And did you advance right away? Was there a period where you didn't advance? How did it look?
It's different for everybody. As opposed to my wife, who's won every single audition she's ever taken. But, she was an international violin competition person. She did very well in international violin competitions. For her, taking an orchestra audition is like child's play. Wait.
So am I interviewing the wrong Wetzel, Mick? Is that what you're trying to say?
I think we need to pull Stacy in on this. She's absolutely amazing. And I did international viola competitions, and it was actually great preparation for me to take orchestra auditions on a high level, like top orchestral auditions. I always was in the finals. Every audition from 1988 forward, I was in the finals. I took many auditions and made the finals and didn't get the job. Several, I got runner-up, associate principal in San Francisco, principal in Minnesota. I was always a bridesmaid, never a bride. And I had a lot of self-doubt, like, what am I doing wrong? And I actually flipped it on its head. What am I doing right? Because I'm doing a lot of things right. There's just that 1% I need to look at and improve and polish and refine and get me just over the top and win a position.
Was there an X factor? Was there something that you did that did get you over that hump? Or was it just luck and frequency?
Yeah, it was just doggedness. I think I after every audition that I ever took, I didn't stop. I knew that it wasn't my last. I wanted this pretty badly and had great support at home from my wife. I had great coaches, and it was just a question of the last little, like I said, 1% of refinement. I have a really good friend from church who was a professional baseball pitcher, and he didn't get to the big leagues, but he played AA ball. Big, tall guy, 6'6", left-hander, had a 98-mile-an-hour fastball. I mean, he was just a rock star. Tore his shoulder out, but so he actually went into banking and probably did better at banking than he did at baseball. But he told me that, and I wish I could remember these numbers, Chris, but he told me the difference between somebody who's about to get fired from Major League Baseball and somebody who's a rock star in terms of their batting average, the difference, 1 hit per week. The guy who is Barry Bonds, or, you fill in the blank, he gets 1 hit a week more per week than the guy who's going to get fired or go down to the minor leagues. And so that's what I tell my clients that I coach, is that you've come so far, but keep going. And that last little bit of real estate, that last 1% is it's the biggest payoff, but it's like the biggest struggle sometimes. And you'll get there. Just keep going. And I had people in my corner telling me that, like, you're so close. You're so close. Don't give up.
Let's talk about talent. Is it a real thing? Is it made up? Does it matter? Is it important to be successful? Do you consider yourself to be talented?
I do. I mean, I'm talented. I know that God gave me gifts, and they're gifts that you can't teach. In a former life, I was a basketball coach. I coached the women's basketball team at La Cañada High School. And there are 2 things that I can't teach on the basketball court. One is height, obviously, and the other is quickness, lateral movement. You either have it or you don't. And I can help people improve their vertical leap. I can help people improve their quickness, but ultimately it is what it is. And that's true with the people that I coach. There are some things that I cannot teach, like pitch. Either you have a good ear or you don't. I can help you refine what you have, but I can't teach that. The other is sound quality. That just kind of blows my mind. There's some people who just the second they pick up an instrument, whether it's a violin, viola, or cello, they just get a beautiful sound. To me, that's a gift. And I know that I have those gifts. However, when it comes to just like the natural movement of a string player, that's not something I'm gifted at all. I would say I'm probably the least gifted amongst our 12 violists in the LA Philharmonic. Things just don't come naturally to me that way. So I've had the opportunity to kind of fight through that, struggle through that, learn. I've had amazing teachers, but that, I think I've told you this before, I feel like that's my superpower, because as a teacher, because I've had to break things down and figure it out for myself, which has enabled me to do the same for other people who might be struggling with something similar.
And we'll be right back. I want to give a huge thanks to the sponsor of the Honesty Pill podcast, Yamaha Corporation of America. I've been playing Yamaha equipment for decades in my own practice room, on stage with the Los Angeles Philharmonic, or touring all over the world, and Yamaha has been an absolute game changer. Something I love about Yamaha is the way they pursue excellence in all of their work and at all levels. They are as dedicated to bringing quality work for beginning students as they are for marquee artists. I admire their commitment to continuous improvement and creating a community that includes all of the musicians they serve. Make every note count, play Yamaha. Okay, let's get back to the show. You know, that thing about the innate quality of sound, that's something you can even hear in kids when they touch a piano or sing or pick up a violin and study for a little while. They can get a great sound. Even out of those little tiny violins, there's still a sound. I mean, and when they're developing those early practice habits, one of the most beautiful anchors to inspire them to come back and connect with the music is sound. I mean, that's the whole reason why playing a concert Steinway is a lot more fun for a 4-year-old than a Casio keyboard. The kid with the Steinway is going to get sucked into that sound and that world of connection and vibration. Speaking of habits, what is habit stacking?
Well, you establish a habit, and that's the first element, I guess, of habit stacking. And I mean, give me an example of a habit, a time, a place, and a period of time that you practice, for example. And let's say I'm gonna start my practice at 7 a.m. I'm gonna practice for right now. My warm up is an hour and 26 minutes. It used to be 45, but now that I'm 60, it has to be a little bit more. And so I've established that habit. If I want to stack a habit on top of that, I could actually stack it within that hour and 26 minutes, or I could stack it at the end of that. And you just keep doing that. And it takes, I think they say it takes 6 weeks to establish a habit. Yeah, it's just stacking one positive habit on top of another.
If you were to maybe put up a challenge for listeners or your students, what would be a way they could implement that? Like how do we build that? Let's break that down a little bit. You walk into your practice room tomorrow. You want to do something different than you did last time. How do we start stacking those habits together to be effective? And for me, I mean, when I start reaching in my practice, you eventually hit a wall and it can become frustrating. I want to work around that. I want to make it joyful. I want to make it short enough that I'm still getting positive returns, but I do want to create habits because it's going to take some falling down before it starts to work. So how would you coach someone to start that process?
I'd say start small. One of my high school students, we have a scale workout that we do together, and it takes 12 minutes without stopping to go through that element of the scale workout. And it's an endurance thing, mental and physical. And I remember when I first started doing this with him, he's like, "Oh, Dr. Wetzel, I got to stop." I'm like, "Okay." So we'd stop and stretch out and do it. But gradually, little by little, he got to the point where he could do the whole 12-minute thing. Now I spend 40 minutes on scales on everything, but that's just one element of it. And so, we started with 4 minutes, and then we worked our way to 8 and, 10 and then 12. We got to 12. And it's like standing with your arms straight out for 12 minutes. That's what it feels like. So you feel the burn a little bit. I'm such a huge advocate of taking rest in between those elements. And I have specific stretches that I do. But yeah, to answer your question, back to the habits, starting small, starting with simple. And I have a rule actually for myself, and I impose this rule on my students, and it's Mick's 5-minute rule. If I don't feel like practicing, I have to do it for 5 minutes. And if I don't feel like doing it at the end of the 5 minutes, I can stop. And guess what? I've never stopped. The hardest part is getting started. And if you start, then you're in the groove and you can do it. That in itself is a habit.
I apply the same strategy for running. If I commit to a run streak, I will run minimum 1 mile every day for 30 days or 60 days or 90 days.
Brilliant.
1 mile. No ifs, ands, or buts, no negotiations. Because the problem is if you're like, I'm going to run 5 times this week, every day is the opportunity for you to negotiate, is today the day I take off or not? So it's 7 days a week, 1 mile only. And just like you said, you get out there, you hit the road, you get your shoes on, you get your headphones on, you do a mile, you might as well do 3, you might as well do 5, you might as well do 7. And, obviously you taper and balance not to hurt yourself. Same thing in the practice room. But that is a great way to do it. 5 minutes. I love that rule. That's a great lead into something I wanted to ask you about, which is considering this unprecedented shift that the music world has made over the past 2 years into this hybrid situation, suddenly pre-recording music to be streamed over the internet. How was that transition for you as a performer and as a teacher? It
was pretty seamless. I actually had started teaching online in 2019. I had 2 of my students at the Colburn School Academy were from Taiwan. And they would go back to Taiwan during the summer. And I'm not the jealous teacher. I love my students to study with other people, especially if they're better than me. But these 2 young women were going back to Taiwan. And a lot of the things that I was working with them on, like, for example, I have an 18-month spiccato program. One of the most challenging strokes on the viola is spiccato, to do it correctly and to do it well for the rest of your life. You can grow old with this spiccato that I was taught and that I teach. But they would go back to their teachers in Taiwan for June, July, and August. And a lot of the things that I was incrementally building were gone when they'd come back in September. And it was frustrating. So the next summer I said, listen, girls, I will teach you virtually. I don't know how we're going to do it, but we're going to try, and let's just see how it works. And I will teach you over the summer. I think we did it through Google Hangouts video. We tried FaceTime. It didn't work. We tried several things, and there was just too much lag and the sound was bad, but Google Hangouts video worked. And I didn't even use a webcam. I just used my MacBook Pro microphone, and I used a Bose Bluetooth speaker so I could hear them. But I saw them and heard them well. They saw and heard me well, and they made progress, and I was kind of blown away. And I thought, this is cool. This is kind of a wave of the future, possibly. I felt like I could do this when the pandemic hit, and this was March 13th, 2020, right? When we got the email from the LA Phil, don't come back to work for 2 weeks. Remember 2 weeks? Mm-hmm. And I told my Colburn students, these 2 girls were actually still there. And I had 6 other students. And I said, let's work virtually. We'll do this for now. Well, it turned out that's what we did for the next 18 months. And Chris, with your help, I was able to upgrade my equipment. And now, I'm doing pretty well with my teaching, my virtual teaching, about as good as you can do.
Well, that's a great follow-up too, because you were talking about, your Bluetooth and your built-in mic in your laptop, and now you've got state-of-the-art equipment for this work. Did you have to refine your teaching process as well to shift into this hybrid? Because that's a whole different element.
Yeah. I like to try to be that 360-degree teacher. When I teach someone in person, I actually wander around them in a 360 degrees. And that's you can't do that, obviously. I have, with the help of our good friend Carrie Salisbury, upgraded some things. Like I have this I call it the finger cam. It's like a Google Earth view of the left hand. That's super cool. So when I demonstrate fingerings, I don't have to like contort to get in front of my webcam. Yeah, it's definitely challenging, and it's not ideal. I will say that.
It's interesting how working in a hybrid space with musicians, because we're all about sound, has really made us look at it from a different angle. Trumpet playing online is challenging because we max out the mics constantly. So if your student has an iPhone and nothing else, they're going to sound like a chainsaw when you're doing an online lesson. So there are a lot of barriers to entry into this hybrid space. But, watching your evolution from that built-in mic to one of the state-of-the-art mics you're talking into right now is part of you becoming a lifelong learner. And I think that's a little bit kind of your habit in everything that you do.
I'm trying.
Let's talk about your programs that you offer a little bit. You mentioned you're teaching at Colburn, and you've also got some college audition prep programs that you've done. Mick's Viola Fix is another, and there's another program coming up soon that I'm curious about, the Viola Habits Academy. Give us sort of like the quick blow-by-blow, like what can somebody expect to get out of something like that, working with you online in a hybrid space?
It's group coaching. And the last course that I taught had 13 people in it. I could probably teach as many as 20 in this course. What I want to talk about in a little bit is about the advantages of working in a group coaching format that I had no idea how effective or positive it was going to be. The next program that I'm going to teach at Viola Habits Academy is going to be a holistic approach to improving your playing. And as an athlete, I know that the best and most important training that I did was in the off season. And I know that my off-season, quote unquote, training in between auditions became the most important aspect of my success in winning auditions. And what I mean by that is when I was preparing for an audition, and ideally it's 12 weeks, I felt like there were some technical things that I wasn't happy with in my playing, but I sort of had to like patch the canoe, so to speak, to get to the end of the river the day of the audition. Like if I wasn't happy with how I got my spiccato in Brahms Haydn Variation 5, I'd figured out how to just kind of like troubleshoot it and, work around it. Or my vibrato. I'm not happy with my vibrato, but I'd figure out a workaround. When the day of the audition comes and goes, the next day is when I get to start working on those specific things and do a deep dive and how to solve those problems so that the next audition that I take, from the first day of those 12 weeks, I'm actually already closer to the finish line because I've improved the general level of my playing.
Awesome advice.
Yeah, and so that's what I'm designing this course around, is that idea of getting the most important work done in the off season, in between auditions. There's so many auditions coming down the pike. The most recent international musician I saw, there were 6 viola openings, and good ones. And that's going to keep happening. There was a log jam of auditions during COVID. They're starting to come around now. If you're in between auditions, this is a great course for you to improve the general level of your playing.
100%. And I literally was flipping through the International Musician yesterday and was amazed at how many, not only how many orchestras are advertising vacancies, but how many vacancies within each orchestra there are. Like you just said, there are 3 in one section and 6 in another, where sometimes there won't be an audition for months for that instrument. So I think there's a lot of churn right now because of, COVID also challenged a lot of people's resolve if this is what they want to do, or if they were getting close to retirement, maybe just, head out a little bit early. And now, so the lots of vacancies are here. And I think you've got 2 groups of people. One are going to be sitting on the couch eating potato chips, and the other ones are going to be preparing for auditions. And the ones who are preparing are the ones who are going to kick the doors down when they get the opportunity. So
it's a great opportunity. And Chris, it gives me hope. It gives me hope for our future, but also the future of the next generation of players that are out there taking auditions right now. This is a very good sign.
So to tap into your sports background and your musical background, what's the difference between a teacher and a coach?
I feel like a teacher is sort of speaking from the mountaintop, and a coach is in the trenches working with you. I feel like my work with my clients as a coach is more collaborative. We're going through this process together. I'll be at your side. I actually, Chris and I have done some running together, and I'm sort of past that at this point in my life. But I remember preparing, my wife and I used to do half marathons. And Chris, that run that you and I did, I'll never forget. We ran from my house down to the Rose Bowl, around the Rose Bowl, up Suicide Hill and back. And it was like 6 miles or something. That was a great day. I loved that. And at that point in my life, I was working with a running coach, and his name's Mike Thatcher. And Mike, at age 33, could run a 4:17 mile. Guy was just a gazelle. And he used to set out courses for me to train on down in the Arroyo, near where we lived. And he'd mark each mile with a rock. And we'd set different pace for a half mile, a mile, whatever, within the 5-mile course that we do. And he would run next to me. And sometimes he would run in front of me, running backwards. When I was, and at that point I was 50 years old, I was running a 7:30 mile pretty consistently, which is not bad, pretty respectable for a man that age. And he would be doing this and not breathing hard or sweating. But that's not the point. The point is he was running with me. He was running next to me. He was aware of everything, the temperature of the air, the landscape, the light, everything, how I felt, how I was breathing. He was monitoring that. And that's how I coach. I'm right there with you. I've lived this. I am living this, and I will run next to you. That's my goal.
That's a great response. I always think of coaches as more collaborative, and also, in a sort of silly way, a coach basically just helps you realize how to do something that you can already do. That's a lot of the challenge that I've seen, is like improvement through removal of the things that are holding you back. And it's the jam in the jar syndrome, where you can't see the label if you're the jam, no matter how hard you look. But a coach can pick up the jar and say, oh yeah, I can read that right here. Smucker's, 12 ounces, that's strawberry preserve, brilliant. Whatever.
I love that.
Can I throw some rapid fire questions at you? And these are kind of silly, but I want to hear your response. Sure. Anyway, do you know what the most expensive viola in the world is?
My viola is made after, it's a bench copy of a very important viola. It's possibly the oldest viola that's being used today. It was made in 1545, and it's worth $4.5 million. My viola is not worth that.
Check this out. The McDonald Stradivarius viola is within the top 10 most expensive musical instruments in the world. And in 1987, it was put up for auction for a cool $45 million.
Yikes.
All right. Just throwing that out there. Parents, if you're listening, trumpets are cheap, man. Of course, viola is a great instrument to learn for a million reasons, but
that's not the worst of it, though. Or I guess it is the worst of it, but there's more bad news. I played a bow recently that was made by Tort. in, I think 1870 something, 1872, $385,000 for a stick.
Oh, you don't even.
It was gorgeous too. I mean, it was amazing.
That's incredible. Oh, those things you don't even think about. The bow. Your bow costs more than all my trumpets put together. What's the largest ensemble gathering of violists in recorded history? Any ideas, Mick?
No.
This
is stump the violist, I guess.
No,
I'm stumped.
I'm sure you would know these, but I just wanted to say them because this is the Viola podcast. Check it out. The world's largest ever recorded viola ensemble took place in Porto, Portugal on the 19th of May, 2013. It was a viola flash mob made up of 353 viola players.
Wow.
And the event was organized by the Portuguese Viola Association as part of their biennial conference. Who knew that there was that many violists in Portugal or in Europe even, and that there's a Portuguese Viola Association?
Amazing.
All right, I'm going to wrapping up here we're going off the rails. How do you feel about viola jokes, Mick? Are we clear for a couple?
Yeah, I guess. Okay.
And I brought that up actually as kind of tongue in cheek. Why is a viola joke a thing? Because I've talked to people who are not musicians and they don't understand viola jokes. And it's actually kind of mean. Believe me, there are plenty of trumpet playing jokes that aren't fit to be told on the air. Why did the viola become a punchline?
It's C-string envy.
Explain that a little bit.
You know, it's interesting. I did an interview with Esa-Pekka Salonen, and I asked him what his favorite instrument was. And he said, the viola. I said, really? Why? I never, you were my music director for 13 years. I didn't know that. And he went into great detail as to why it was his favorite instrument. You know, it fills a gap as a composer. There's a gap in the orchestration that only the viola can fill. He actually prefers the timbre of the viola on the G and the C string to the cello, same strings, just an octave above it. But here's my explanation for that. And you probably don't want me to go into so much detail, but back in the early 20th century, if you wanted to study viola at the Royal Academy of Music in London, you studied with the snare drum teacher.
Wow.
Yeah. And the instrument is has always been kind of the ugly stepsister because of composers didn't really know what to do with it because no one was really interested in playing it. The viola. Okay. So really quickly, the cello is 30 inches long and it's acoustically perfect for the length and gauge of the strings. The violin is 14 inches long. It's acoustically perfect for the length and gauge of those strings as well. G, D, A, E. The viola is, anywhere between, I guess, like 14 and a half to 17 inches practically. There's some violists who play 18-inch violas, but that's pretty cumbersome. If the viola were acoustically perfect, it would have to be 22 inches long. That's like, I'm 6'4". I couldn't do that. I have to play it like a cello. It's just huge. What happens then is if you have this shorter instrument relative to the string length, shorter relative to the gauge of the strings, it's hard to get a nice sound out of it. And I think for decades and maybe a couple centuries, people didn't want to play it because it's just really easy to get a bad sound on the viola. And then, of course, it gets a bad rap because you pick up a viola as a violinist and it's like, ugh, gosh, it's so gravelly. And I think, and I feel like I have the gravitas to say this because of my experience. I was a violinist till I was 24 years old. The violin is so much easier than the viola. And I liken it to when you walk into a room and you flip the switch, what do you expect?
The light to go on.
Yeah. What happens if the light doesn't go on when you flip the switch?
It's disorienting.
Well, you like, what the heck? Like, what's going on? Watch sometime if a violinist is playing in their E string kind of whistles, they pull it away and they look at it like, what the heck? What's wrong? So there's this expectation of getting a nice sound immediately without much effort on the violin. So I think getting a nice sound on the violin is a lot like a light switch. However, getting a nice sound on the viola reminds me so much of lighting a candle. You have to light the match and coax that wick to life. And that's what you get to do with a sound and on the viola. And the other thing, I'm not answering your question about viola jokes, but I'm just sort of promoting the viola because I love the viola so much. The viola is like that quirky friend. And you and I have a friend, but he's a string player. And sometimes I'll say good morning and he'll say something not very nice to me involving an F word. And I'm like, I love you, man. That's the viola. I mean, sometimes the viola is just like, I'm not ready to play yet. And the viola is more, what's the word, susceptible to temperature change and humidity change. Like right now, the humidity here is 42%. My viola sounds great 40% and above. If it gets below like 30, it's like a hand grenade. I'm not sure what's going to come out. And every viola is different. Like I play on a 17-inch viola, 16 5/8, not quite 17. There are some people in our section who play really small violas. So none of them are the same. So it's just like that quirky friend that you love because they're quirky.
Well, if anybody has figured out how to coax a beautiful, inspiring sound out of that instrument, it is you and our colleagues in the LA Phil.
I appreciate that.
So Mick, what's the last like mind-blowing book that you read?
It's called Bubblegum Brain. Ready, Get, Mindset, Grow, written by Julia Cook. And I was sitting in my oldest son's living room, and my 7-year-old granddaughter said, "Grandpa, can I read you a book?" I'm like, "Yes, sweetie, come read me a book." And she read me this book, and it's my coaching program in a children's book. And I'll read this. It's just a short little thing, just 2 pages. Yes, you do. Everyone does. Your brain only looks like a brick. Just peel off your bubblegum wrapper. See, isn't even that a trick? It's not thick. Now your brain is free to grow and hope and stretch and bend. Get rid of that fixed mindset of yours, and the possibilities will never end. Isn't that awesome? That's just one of like, I don't know, 20 things that I love about this book.
Story Time with the Viola Pro. You guys can all order that book. I will put the links to that in the show notes. If there was, Mick, an actual honesty pill that could give you either a particular superpower or take away a weakness, your kryptonite, as it were, what would it do for you?
If I could take an honesty pill and had a superpower, the superpower that I would want is something that I've had periodically. And when I've had it, it's so impactful. And it's the gift of discernment, to be able to know what my clients are struggling with and why. And if I can know that, I can help them so much better.
That's a great one. Well, you have many gifts as a coach and a musician, Mick, so your clients are tapping into that already. But I love that answer. Where can people find out more about your programs coming up? And most importantly, where can they sign up for your mailing list and follow you on social media?
They can look at my website. It's theviolapro.com, and one word, no spaces. And then my Instagram is mick.wetzel, or the Viola Pro on Instagram. And then my Facebook is Mick Wetzel, M-I-C-K Wetzel, pretzel with a W.
So I'll put all those links in the show notes. And Mick, thank you for taking time. I know this has been a busy couple of weeks for all of us.
My pleasure.
And I will see you on stage again this week for some Berg and Brahms and Mahler and whatever else we're doing. And can't wait to see what else comes from the Viola Pro, and looking forward to it.
Thank you so much, Chris. My pleasure.
All right. Take care, Mick. Bye.
Bye.
Big thanks to Mick Wetzel of theviolapro.com for sharing all of his insight into audition prep, what it's been like to teach online, and even explaining a pretty believable theory as to the origin of viola jokes. I guess they had to come from somewhere. And where else can you get a mindset-themed bedtime story read to you, but right here on the Honesty Pill podcast? Thank you for that, Mick. You can get on the Viola Pro mailing list and be the first to know about the Viola Habits Academy, which I think is launching pretty soon, and everything else that Mick is up to by signing up totally for free at theviolapro.com. Okay, that's it from me today. I've got to get back to practicing this Berg 3 pieces for orchestra. Maybe it's time to go and buy some of those reading glasses. This has been the Honesty Pill podcast, episode 28. You can find out more at honestypill.com. And by the way, if you like what you're hearing on these podcasts, take a minute, head over to Apple Podcasts and leave a review. I know it's kind of confusing to figure out how to do that, but it really does help other people find this content, and I really appreciate hearing from you. Okay, I'm out of here. Thanks for listening. See you next time.